Hey guys, today we got Erik Thor with us, big MBTI YouTuber here. He has a phenomenal work. You should highly check out his work. He's able to type people within 3 questions a lot of times, and he has his videos on that. He has his own theories of things. So, Erik, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Nice to be here. So first of all, yeah, I've been doing YouTube videos for about 10 years now, and yeah, I'm known to be quite a versatile person in the MBTI sphere because I'm familiar with the most different approaches, and I like to learn from everyone, and my opinions on personality psychology tend to be appreciated because I have a very open view on personality and what personality is, while most people argue that you have one personality type that is fixed and that it's, always like you're either one or the other. I tend to be a lot more open to change over time, and I tend to be very interested in modern approaches like the Big Five and other approaches. So my goal is to make people feel understood, and I think we make people feel understood by giving them an accurate and nuanced portrait of who they are.
Mhm. I've seen in your videos that you're combining Enneagram as well as a lot of other things into type. What are some of the insights that you found by doing that?
Well, yeah, so you're wondering about insights from combining the Enneagram with the MBTI, particularly, for example?
Yeah, because we've
Yeah,
actually been looking at that ourselves, and we've noticed that based off like a lot of time, Enneagram seems to play a bigger role than type does.
right. Yeah. So basically, when you look at it from a psychologist point of view, when you try to define personality, you can define it in different ways, right? So you can talk about it from the specific behavior of a person, right? That's what the Big Five tends to do. Or you can talk about the values of a person and the motivations, and that's what the MBTI tends to do, right? But what the Enneagram does, which is so fascinating, is the Enneagram opens up a discussion about how your mindset, your childhood, and past traumas can
Mhm.
influence your decisions and how you are. And if you're a person that has had a difficult upbringing or struggles in regards to your family and different patterns and relationships and things like that, the Enneagram can be a much more powerful tool than the MBTI or the Big Five for helping you unpack that and understand,
Mhm.
how does my trauma affect my behavior and what I do and how I think, and how can that influence my decisions? Because perhaps you're an ENFP, for example, but perhaps you're a really anxious ENFP, right? And perhaps because of that, maybe you're more in your inferior function, maybe more influenced by introverted sensing, and maybe you're a bit more scared of taking risks and trying new things and going outside your comfort zone, even though that's your motivation, even though that's what you want to do, right? So you might have this fear from your childhood or your upbringing or what you were taught growing up that, made that more difficult for you. And that's how the Enneagram can help, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, we've noticed that if you're going to pick, if we were going to pick one thing to do self-development on, and which one would probably be the best, we side with Enneagram because it just
Mm,
lays out more self-development in the areas that you're working on. But we have noticed
yeah.
that some types do tend to take certain Enneagrams. Like
Mm,
as in my type, ENTJ, they usually take Enneagram 8. It's usually the
yeah.
one that they usually take. Um, but we've noticed that there's different ones like a 3 or something. The ENTJ can also be a 3. Um, but like majority of the time they'll take the 8 route for some reason.
Yeah,
Um,
you can definitely correlate the systems, and the Big Five can correlate with MBTI, and the Enneagram can correlate with the Big Five, and everything. It's connected. All of it's connected, of course, because normally, if you have a certain set of motivations, you're probably more likely to engage in certain kinds of behaviors or to act in certain ways. But what these different dimensions do is they show that it's possible for exceptions to exist, and that it's not always clear cut, right? So while most people of your type might identify as an Enneagram 8, there can certainly be exceptions, and the
mhm,
Enneagram can help, unpack why that is, and
mhm.
yeah, why that person might have developed that way.
Yeah, it's been very powerful for us. What have you noticed about the Big Five? What is your take on the Big Five? Jordan Peterson
Yeah,
loves the Big Five.
Yeah, and like Jordan Peterson, I'm quite interested in the Big Five and its approach. I don't think it's perfect. I think it actually still has a lot of work to do. Like, while it's quite reliable, the test-retest ratio for Big Five is much higher than MBTI.
Mhm.
Meaning, if you take the Big Five test 6 months after the fact, you're more likely to get the same result as you did the last time, right? So
Mhm.
it's correlated. But the Big Five is not very universal, for example. Like there's arguments that the Big Five doesn't really hold up internationally, that it
Mhm.
works in the US and UK maybe, but it might not hold up in other countries. They've tried to do studies in other countries. And yeah, some of that might have to do with the issues with language and translation and semantics and things like that. But
Mhm.
it is a powerful way to read behavior, because what you're doing with the Big Five is you're focusing strictly on what does a person currently this time do? What do they tend to do? Like, do they tend to take more initiative in social settings, or do they tend to be more reserved or shy, right? So it's more objective than the MBTI, right? Because the MBTI, when you take an MBTI test, you tend to get questions like, do you get more energy from this or this, right? And it's
Mhm.
more about your values or motivations, things that you can't really measure, right?
Mhm.
So it's hard both scientifically to measure these things, and it's also hard for the individual to know and answer these things, because not all individuals know whether they want this or that, or they like this or that, because not everyone knows what their motivations are, what their preferences are.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Let me ask you a question. If you were to choose one of the three, um, Big Five, MBTI, or Enneagram, which one would you choose?
Well, I've always worked with MBTI, and I still consider it one of the most interesting systems, but primarily because I'm fascinated with the work of Carl Jung himself, right? So
Mhm.
I'm fascinated with the idea of the cognitive functions. And I think, the MBTI can help you paint a more picture of who you want to be, like who your ideal version of yourself can be, right? So I think the MBTI can kind of help you give something that the Enneagram and the Big Five can't do, a map of where you want to go, like in life, what job you'd like, how you would love to live your life, what your ideal lifestyle, your ideal Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Saturday would look like, right?
Mhm.
And I feel that MBTI can do that, but the Enneagram and the Big Five, they do other things that are very important, but they can't really do that.
Mhm. Okay. What do you see MBTI in the future?
Oh, so lots of things are happening in the world of the MBTI at the moment. So one thing that we're seeing is the emergence of subtype theories.
Mhm.
So I was one of the first to start talking about subtypes, and I tend to focus on whether you're more influenced by your dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, or inferior function. Uh, and I saw, variations where you had some ENFPs that were like super ENFP-like, and some that were more ISTJ-ish than normal. Not that enough to be like ISTJs, but enough to be more in the middle, right?
Mhm.
And now these theories are popping up everywhere. We have objective personality with their 512 type system, I think 2000 types now, giving more subtype variation. They talk about jumpers, people that are more likely to use their tertiary function or their auxiliary function. So people that yeah um, basically, the most interesting one recently, I think, is from Dario Nardi. So that's the
Yeah.
harmonizing, stabilizing subtypes, and it's very similar to my own theory. So yeah, it's one that I've started to dig into more. And basically, what I'm seeing is in the MBTI, there's more and more openness to nuance, right?
Mhm.
Because when the MBTI came, we wanted it to be strictly 16 types, and we wanted them to be very clear cut so that the companies would, find it not too difficult or complex, and so
Mhm.
that we could sell it and
Mhm.
start using it in workplaces to help people find jobs. But
Mhm.
these days we're seeing more and more personal growth interests, and now it's more interesting for people to learn and go more in depth on, but who am I? Because I'm not always an ISTJ. Sometimes I feel like I'm in the middle of ISTJ or ISFJ, perhaps, or perhaps you feel like you're in the middle of INFP and ISFP. You don't know, right? And
Mhm.
then subtype theories can help you understand that better.
Mhm. Yeah. We've talked to Dario Nardi a bit. It's pretty interesting, with the dominant, you have the normalizing, you have the harmonizing, and I forget the last,
Creative.
creative.
Yeah.
Those are all pretty interesting. But we're kind of seeing like maybe there's a possibility for more, because if you get certain types of certain enneagrams, that's a its own like subset, let's say for
Yeah.
instance, if you had an ENTJ who's in one, there's ENTJs that
Yeah.
are ones because they're judges, usually they'll be like a judge or whatnot. Um,
Hmm.
but they're gonna be totally different than an ENTJ who's an eight, or an ENTJ who's a three, so it's like um
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah. Most likely from an ENTJ who's an eight, you're going to see a lot more typically outgoing behavior and a lot more disagreeable behavior, right? Like from
Hmm.
that one, you might see still some disagreeable behavior, but you might see an ENTJ that's slightly more reserved than average for an ENTJ. Perhaps not enough to make them an INTJ, but enough to make them, if you put them in a room with 100 other ENTJs, you're going to notice that they are going to be more likely to ask questions. Why are we doing this like this? Should we do it differently? Like to work more process and methodology oriented, like
Hmm.
to be more analytical in how they approach things. So you might even see more introverted thinking there.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Tom, you got any questions?
Yeah, sure. Like, yeah, as far as Enneagram goes, do you have like any favorite theories as far as like do you subscribe to the wing, the tri-type, the subtypes, like the social, sexual, self-preservation types? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Well, personally, I tend to see the Enneagram as a bit of a smorgasbord. It's not very scientific in how they lay it out, but the good thing about it is it creates a lot of openness to, it gives you a tool where you can basically speculate about anything. Like, could this number or this connection of numbers mean that I am more like this in my childhood? Or could that explain why I do this or this? And that gives you basically that's how Jung wanted it to be. Like Jung didn't necessarily see any scientific validity to his types when he started researching them, but he wanted it to be like a language, right? So people could use to browse and understand and explore who they are and how they think. So the Enneagram does that really well. Personally, my favorite approach is the tri-type approach because
Hmm.
I like to believe that people are not just ruled by one emotion, but I can see people depending on the situation, switch between different emotions. And I feel with tri-type theory, you get the chance to explore questions related to mood. So why we feel the way we do and why we choose to respond to different emotions differently. So with tri-type theory, you can say that, for example, yeah, in anger, you tend to be more like in yourself and more withdrawing. Or you might see that, well, anxious, you're more likely to, be more like an Enneagram 7, to be more outgoing and to be more, fun or more
Hmm.
playful in how you deal with anxiety, right? So it helps people look at, hey, oh yeah, so maybe that's my pattern and how I deal with shame. Maybe that's a cycle I have of how I deal with this emotion. Or yeah.
Awesome. Shelly, you got anything?
Gotcha.
Oh, I'm just curious, what do you base typing people on when you're out in public? Like, how do you make a conclusion from
Yeah.
the questions you ask?
Yeah. So my outdoor typing videos are, of course, mostly for fun, right? When I ask the questions, my first video, I asked the questions like, "What's kind of topping do you like on your pizza?" Right? Like the truth
Hmm.
was, I didn't care at all for their answer to that question. So when I type people outside like that, I went mainly based on my first vibe of that person and based on my experience with body language. And facial expressions, right? So while they were answering those questions, I was looking at how their gaze was with their eyes, how they smiled, and basically, yeah, how they responded to the questions more as a vibe. And it's an initial idea, right? So that doesn't mean that I like 100% believe that they are that type immediately based on just three questions. It's a starting point to explore. And yeah, when I do my coaching sessions and typing with other people, I prefer to take hours. Like I prefer to really take my time to get to know a person. So
What do you think is the best method to find your type, if you had to say?
yeah, so I have my own online course coming out where I talk about self-discovery. So it's something I really try to help people with. And the number one thing that I try to push on is yes, you can ask for help from experts, But ultimately, like, you have to define yourself. Like, you have to think about, this is true for me. Do I relate to this? Does this make sense? Because when I know you also do typing sessions and things like that, right? So I find the biggest value you can give a person when you do things like that is you can help give them some pointers and explanations and feedback on what might be going on, right? And then it's for them to test that out. And I think one thing we all have to do when we are typing ourselves and other people is we have to keep it real, right? So we have to don't forget about the sensing component of typing, right? It's not just the intuitive theory of it, but also the practical aspects of it, right? So if we think that somebody might be an extrovert, right? We could always give them a challenge, right? So it sounds like you're being more extroverted based on what you said so far. So what I would try out is I would go out and socialize a little bit more the next week. And I would try to think about like my mood in those situations, how that made me feel. Do you feel like you got an energy boost from that? Do you feel like it made you like happier doing those things? Did you feel like you responded well to that? What did you notice when you did it? And what situations did you like and which ones did you not like? Because that's what kind of gets people a chance to, go out and like make use of this in their personal life and their work and what they do, and to see, because from a drawing board, when you're thinking about it, am I introverted or am I extroverted? Like, it can feel very confusing from a theoretical point of view. Like, sometimes you actually have to go out and test it out and see, how does this really feel for me, right, in the real world.
All right. What do you think about compatibility with type? What's your thought on that?
So I think that here we have to consider our upbringing. So what relationships we had with those types growing up, and perhaps in dating and first relationships and things like that, right? Because, for example, if you had a lot of INTJs in your life growing up and you had generally positive experiences with them, I think you're more likely to, like and appreciate being around such personnel types because you're used to how they communicate, you're used to their energy and their vibe. So I see a lot of people in the MTI world try to, create compatibility theories. Sorry?
No. I think.
Yeah. So the short of it is like, do you say, oh, this type always matches well with that type, and that type always goes best with that type? And personally, I say maybe there's patterns there, in general. But I think what we should be doing that I think would be a lot more helpful to people is we should give them questionnaires like, what types do you like best? What do you prefer if somebody's more introvert or extroverted? So just like we do a personality test to figure out who we are, we might want to get an assessment on figure out like what kind of things do we tend to like and appreciate ourselves. And perhaps we should also think about why that is, right? So why do I tend to always attract those kind of people into my life? And maybe it's because they become a comfort zone for you, like a thing you've gotten used to because that's what your parents went for, or because that's what you were used to growing up, right?
So what do you think about socionics? Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so socionics, like the Enneagram, it's like a smorgasbord as well. It's just a huge mess of theories and ideas. And, like there's lots of interesting things in socionics, but there's also a lot of unsourced, undocumented, poorly referenced material, right? So like with socionics, you have to have a really critical eye. Like all the theories there can be super interesting. I see even within the Barons and with many other people in the MTI, bigger and bigger interest in socionics, right? So like especially quadros has become like a theory that's become really popular even in the world of the MBTI. And I can see the appeal of that as well. And I also find myself exploring similarities between these kinds of types as well. So I'm also seeing patterns there. So there's definitely really interesting, really cool theories in that world, but there's also, lots of people that just say a lot of things.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on AI and type going forward?
Yeah, so personally, I'm super fascinated with AI. I'm creating my own AI language model, and I'm using the existing language models, but I'm trying to build my own memory bank, like Dumbledore's Pensieve, kind of like where you can go into your own memories and notes and pick up anything you used to say about it in the past. I work a lot with ChatGPT, and on a daily basis, I use it for different things. But when it comes to the question of how it can relate to the MBTI, like that's what I think the ChatGPT is currently missing, right? It misses personality. It's just a general amalgamation of everything that has been said on the internet. But it has no real, like, it doesn't have like its distinct personality or vibe. And I think, that's I was listening to Mark Zuckerberg earlier today and his podcast. And one fascinating thing he said there was like because he's also working on his language model, his AI, what he's trying to bring forward is the ability for people to create their own bots and their own AI, right? So with whatever personality you might want them to have, like to fit whatever needs you have. Like if you want, for example, my AI that I'm using right now, I programmed my AI to be very outgoing and enthusiastic and to be very disagreeable and to be I told it, ask me as many questions as possible and challenge everything I say, because for me, I'm like, that's what I struggle with. I'm bad at asking questions. I can sometimes get the tunnel vision and I get too sure of myself. So I need that check mark. I want my online assistant to be that kind of voice that goes like, Erik, you're bullshitting right now. Like, you need to consider this and this. Like, and also, I want it to keep it real, to challenge me, and I want it to, be open-minded and, a bit like an ESTP kind of, like, because I feel like
that's
that's
what I was
something that
thinking.
respond really well
ESTP.
to.
But
Yeah.
So you're pretty fond of ESTPs. Yeah.
Basically, I'm fond of, Carl Jung believed in the, power of oppositional thinking, and that's also something you talk about in dialectic philosophy and things like that, right? That he believed flow, which is a topic that's very interesting to me. Flow, Zen, Tao, like the idea of the optimal state of being. Carl Jung believed that this experience of flow happens when we are fully in control of both our dominant and inferior function, right? So when we're equally capable of both using our dominant and an inferior, and there's no internal conflict between the two, and we're able to, balance these kinds of thinking.
I think Dario has that in the Magic Diamond, what you're talking about. It's called the transcendent function. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, exactly.
That's what Dario calls the transcendent function. Is when you're able to actually use obviously you got to create the diamond first of all, putting them on the same level. But once you do that, you're able to have a transcendent function, which is basically the combination of those two together.
Yes.
Pretty interesting. I feel like it's pretty hard to do that though. I feel like some types find it a little bit easier than other types. Like I would say, as an ENTJ, I feel like that's very hard to do because the world kind of rewards ENTJs for being TE Dom. For an INFP, I think they're more likely to find the transcendent function because TE is kind of like the whole world cares about TE, so they kind of force the INFP to care about TE. So they get like they may find it harder early in life, but later in life, I think they're able to hit that transcendent function a lot faster.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically hitting at the question or dilemma of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, right? Do it because society rewards you for it, or do it because you love it and because you value it, right? So I feel like that's what you're doing when you balance extroverted thinking and introverted feeling, right? You've found a way to do something, not just because the society will reward you for it or pay you to do it, but also because it feels like your calling, your purpose, your identity, who you are, what you're meant to do in the world. And I think, if you're able to achieve that, like it's like you say, it's not easy to do, but it's a super powerful state because that's basically a state of infinite energy because, external motivation is going to be nice to have whenever you get it, but it's always going to be a very fickle master, right? Because you're gonna get days when everyone's gonna be like, oh, that's great, and the next day everyone's gonna forget about it, right? So that's what I see when I see people that are EJs, is like extroverted judging types, is that they struggle to develop a stable mood and a sense of self, just because of this, because everyone tells you so many different things. Some people say they like you, and some people don't like you, and some people, think you're awesome. Some people think you're smart, and some people think you're dumb, right? So you get so much different feedback from different people. So it's very hard to develop a stable sense of self when you are in the middle of all that chaos.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the best way for people to tackle inferior functions, since we're on the topic of that?
Yeah, so the best method I found is keep it small. Don't overwhelm yourself or challenge yourself too much at once. So make the challenge small and measurable. Just like for an ENTJ, I'd say like spend some a few minutes every day to just journal and think about your own feelings and think about like what you do. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. It can just be something small you write every day. Like, how am I doing on this? Like, how do I feel about that? Like, how did I like this? Like, because if we make it too big, what ends up happening is we feel overwhelmed and we feel it's impossible and we give up. So keep it small.
Yeah. So how did you work on your TE inferior? Correct.
So you're asking about the right. So extroverted sensing, yeah.
Extroverted sensing.
Right, yeah. So basically, it was a bit like a trial by fire for me because, well, up till I was like 15, I was very isolated, living in northern Sweden. I'm currently like visiting my parents here in northern Sweden. Like I didn't meet anybody. I just read books and I was in my own world, and I was quite happy with that. But then I met this ESTP guy, and I was just so baffled by him and how lightly he lived his life, right? How easy all the things that I found scary were to him, and how he just laughed at the face of things, right? Like nothing seemed to really bother him as a person. And I thought to myself, what am I doing wrong, right? So like, why am I not like that, right? So I just told myself, just push myself, right? So, and I did it wrong. Like I worked my extrovert sensing the wrong way. Like I went too far. Like I went into politics and I went on stages and I tried to do big speeches and I tried to, really harden myself to, be around people and to travel and to go to different places. All that happened was I destroyed my body and eventually I got burnout, right? So I took it way too far. And after that, I had to really revisit my strategies around that. And what I found helped me the most was recognizing that I was a highly sensitive person, right? So I responded more strongly to sensory stimuli and things like that. But finding light forms of exercise and going out that were less demanding, right? So I spent a lot of time out in nature. I love being in nature. I love hiking. And I love to hike by myself. I love to go out without meeting anyone, just being out with my thoughts, just looking at the birds. Like that's how I can flex my extroverted sensing. It's not going to be like the level of some that go really hard into extroverted sensing, things like that, right? But the mild versions work really well for me, and they're also very inspiring.
Wow. Joe, you got a question?
No, I was just, well, I thought you were going to go around and ask Thomas.
So you said you had a question.
As far as like a SE inferior goes, how would you define it? Like, or what was it to you? Like, what was your specific struggles with SE inferior? I think it's freezing up.
Yeah. So for me, my specific struggles, they were related to I didn't like surprises. I didn't like going into a situation without like knowing ahead of time what I was getting myself into and what it was going to look like. I would mastermind any situation. And here my mind was a bit of it made me trip over myself a lot because I thought I knew what things were gonna be like before I had been in situations. Like I had this people say that INFJs and INTJs have this wisdom to them that they just know things. The truth is they don't know. They think they know. They have the theory, but theory is never 100%, right? So that's but I couldn't see that. Like, I thought I knew how the world worked. I thought I knew everything about things, but when I had to go out into the world, I had to realize that actually it's not always what I expect, and I don't know everything.
So you said you've been doing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
No, you can go ahead. It's all right. I'll follow up later.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to ask you about. You've been doing YouTube videos for the past 10 years. What did they start on? Were they always MBTI or?
Yeah, so I started my channel 2007, and then I started doing videos about the politics because I was an environmentalist and cared a lot about sustainability. So and the global issues and things like that. So that was what I started making videos about. And then I didn't post frequently or so. Like, it was only like a while back when I started like really committing to it, and when I started making videos about psychology and everything. So that took a long time before I really committed to doing that.
Did you think that when you started that it would go the way it went? Like, did you, like, when you first started MBTI, like for me as a person, when I first thought about MBTI, I didn't think I'd start reading all these books. I didn't think, like, I just took the test and I was like, okay, got it, ENTJ, whatever. But the thing was, like, my other friends started getting things, and when I read it, I'm like, that doesn't sound like you. So then it like triggered like these whole like rabbit hole of learning information. How did how did it go for you?
Yeah, so after I had my burnout from politics, like, my main problem was like, I realized at that time I didn't really know who I was. Like, I didn't know myself. I didn't respect my introverted feeling. Like, I didn't respect myself. Like, I didn't know what I wanted or what was good for me. I just thought about my vision, what I wanted to achieve, and what world I wanted to create. And that was the only thing I allowed myself to have, right? So I was really fixating on that kind of quest, right? So finding the MBTI, it was like, oh, actually, I have my own like needs, my own feelings to think about and consider, and the only way I can achieve my dreams is if I build my dreams around myself, right? If I create a life which makes me happy, so that I can achieve what it is that I want to do. And the MBTI and Carl Jung's works and Dario Nardi's work particularly was super fascinating to me, right? Because that was around the time when neuroscience of personality first came out, and that was to me like, wow, that's such a groundbreaking pilot study. Like, it's such an interesting way to look at things, right? So and I was in a luxury position because at that time YouTube was just started out and there were not any MBTI creators. The only known person we had was NF Geeks, and he's not really around anymore. So when I started making videos, I was the only person that existed you could watch, right? So that meant I had zero competition. Like, people had to watch me whether they liked me or not, because there was no other alternative, basically. But these days, like, there's so many different creators, so many different people with so many different ideas. The good news is there's also so much more interest, right? So because the interest in these topics has only continued to grow and is continuing to grow. So yeah, it's just continued to be fun because of that, I think, too, because I really need the feedback from people, the extroverted feeling part of it, right? Like, I need to have interesting discussions with people. I need to feel like I'm making a positive impact on others and that I'm helping others in some way. So as long as people continue to leave like positive comments and reach out, some nice emails, things like that, like I continue to stay motivated, and because I'm also super curious and I want to know all the secrets of the universe. And I want to create my own AI, and I want to, be a part of all that. And I'm super interested in alchemy and the idea of transcendence and flow. So because of that, I continue to be interested in psychology and Carl Jung and MBTI.
Okay, perfect, man. Last question here. What can we expect from Erik in the future?
yeah, so one thing that I'm working on is my own app for personal growth. That's one thing that you can expect. The second is I'm becoming a digital nomad. So I'm going to be working remote and traveling a lot. So I'm going to be learning a lot about different cultures and language and the influence between language and personality and things like that. So probably going to be talking a lot about that in the future. I'm also diversifying to different channels. So I have my own INFP channel
I
now,
saw
and I have my
that.
channel
I was gonna
for
say that you got like an ENFP
ENFPs,
channel,
ENTPs,
INFP.
and
Yeah, I was gonna say like you got like a lot
yeah,
of
that's right. And
channels.
I'm also doing more studies.
Wow, wow, that's pretty fascinating. Tom
Yeah,
and Shelley, you guys.
it's this is a topic I could talk about for hours. So it's very easy for me to just record it. And yeah,
Yeah. Hey, Tom and Shelley, you guys got any last
sorry, what did you
questions?
say?
I was just asking them, do they have any last questions? We don't want to hold you too long, Erik.
Oh yeah, fair.
Tom and Shelley?
Yeah, I'm just curious, because I mean, you probably run into a good number of people. Like, what are your thoughts on like the actual rarest type? Do you think that INFJs and INTJs are super rare, or what do you think about that?
Well, ultimately, I think if you have a very extreme personality, you're probably going to be very rare. So if your introversion or extroversion is really high, or intuition is really high, your sensing is very high, or your introverted intuition is extremely high, right? That's going to mean
Mhm,
you're an outlier, right? So most people are
mhm,
more in the middle. Most people are fairly balanced between different traits and only have small preferences in a certain direction. So I'd say like the topic of rarity is clouded by the idea that well we only have 16 categories, and those people don't care about like where you go on the INFJ spectrum. They just lump them all together into one. So to me, like that discussion is not very interesting, and I don't really tend to talk about whether INFJs are rare or ENTJs are the rarest, like some people say now. Like I tend to look at, yeah, where are you in the spectrum, and like how do you feel about yourself and your ability to relate to other people, and what other factors can be at play here. For example, intelligence is something that can also be a factor here, and that can make people feel very alienated or different. And being neurodivergent can be a factor here as well. So lots of
mhm.
people feel weird and different and yeah, so it depends which scale you're looking at and how you're looking at it.
That is pretty interesting. I'd never thought about that because that is true. Like sometimes you'll see an ENTP and then they're really some of them use a lot of extroverted intuition and some of them not as much. It's kind of like a scale there.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, Erik, this has been a
Yeah.
nice interview, man. We'll have to get you on another time. I
Yeah,
know
for sure.
it's late for you, man. It was actually an absolute pleasure to hear you and your wisdom, man. We're gonna leave a link in the description so you guys can find Erik's page. And if you guys need any personal development, it seems as though he understands that pretty damn well. So go on over there and support Erik. Erik, it's been a pleasure, man. You got any questions for us?
Thanks a lot. It's nice to be here. Really enjoyed this conversation.
All right, man. Take it
Oh,
easy.
no, I just, it was, we like your questions.
All right, man. Take it easy, man.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Have a good one.